This is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to another episode of TFiR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Tanmai Gopal, co-founder and CEO of Hasura. Tanmai, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Swapnil. Hey, everybody.
And today we are going to talk about the new announcement that came through Hasura, which is integration support for Snowflake. So talk a bit about this announcement.
Today, Hasura released support for being able to query Snowflake with a GraphQL API. And that's kind of what we've released today. We're very excited to kind of work with our customers where they have data inside Snowflake. They need to query it over an API. And that API that is now provided by Hasura supports GraphQL and REST.
What are the pain points that are there in the industry? And since you are also a co-founder of the company, let's also tie it into the mission goal of Hasura, how you are helping. That's when we'll be able to understand this announcement and your bigger, larger mission and goal.
So let's kind of just talk a little bit about specifically with Snowflake and why people want APIs on top of Snowflake, right? So increasingly, as kind of people are putting more and more data into things like into Snowflake, it's the number of applications and services that want to consume that data is also increasing, right? And as we all know, as soon as we have multiple services or applications that want to consume data from a single data source, especially a database, you don't want to give direct access to the database, right? You want to have an API layer, and that API layer can provide access to that data, right? But building this API layer is challenging because you have to, let's say you have 100, 200 models in Snowflake. So you have to build lots of APIs for each of those models. Your API should support joins and aggregations and stuff like that. That becomes challenging to do. You want to enforce authorization, authentication. You want to make sure that there's some decoupling between your models in Snowflake and the API models that you have. So all of that work, which you would typically do at the API layer, is challenging, and that's the work that you want to automate. And so that's kind of roughly the context in which people are starting to kind of increase the number of data APIs that they have on top of Snowflake, and how Hasura kind of automates that, right? Where Hasura is basically saying, instead of you building these APIs manually on Snowflake, we'll just automate this process for you by looking at Snowflake and by you as a user of Hasura providing some configuration.
Can you also talk a bit about, when we talk about developers today, what are the major challenges that they face when especially working with multiple data sources?
Broadly, I would say 3 challenges. The first challenge is when you have data coming in from multiple sources, that there is query planning kind of work that needs to be done that requires a fair amount of technical expertise, and it's not relevant to the business, right? So depending on how you're joining data, you're bringing data from 2 tables within the same database, you're bringing data from multiple databases, you're bringing data from a database and a SaaS service like Salesforce, right? All of these 3 are different types of data fetching, and optimization is very different for all of these 3 types of data fetching kind of issues, right? The second issue is authorization and security, where you want to make sure that, again, from the data that they're fetching across these multiple sources, the way that you are securing each piece of data and the authorization rules that you have are well integrated, right? Both from the point of applying those rules and enforcing those rules, but also from a data fetch and performance point of view. For example, you don't want to fetch 1 billion records from Snowflake and then apply security filtering rules on them, right? You want to make sure that you pre-filter that data within Snowflake and then fetch that data and then join that from data that is coming in from another service like Salesforce. The third challenge is API design, right? How do you design a flexible, standardized API that can work across so many data sources, right? How do you provide predicates, projections, aggregations, right? And joins across so many different types of data sources without reducing to the least common denominator or without regressing to the mean? You want to provide a flexible API, rich API, but still a standardized API. These are the kind of 3 top challenges that people face when they're designing their own API across data sources.
This is one question that I asked you last time also, and I will ask you again, which is also talk a bit about the role of GraphQL, in addressing this challenge for developers.
I think when we're starting to look at APIs for our data, right? We're not kind of accessing data directly. We're not accessing databases directly. We're not accessing sources of truth directly, but we're accessing it over an API. Now, kind of the challenges that I was talking about, the API design, being able to make a rich API that returns and talks in HTTP and that talks in JSON is hard to do. And GraphQL kind of provides a really nice way of being able to query data from multiple places, avoiding multiple API calls and instead making a single query and fetching a result and stuff like that. So GraphQL from a API point of view, especially when applied to data, it becomes very useful for people building modern applications and services. So that's kind of the role of GraphQL, and basically saying, let's aggregate our data and APIs that are coming from multiple sources and provide a unified API endpoint and a unified query layer so that modern applications and services can use JSON can use HTTP and JSON as a protocol to interact with that data.
We talked about what you folks do. We talked quickly initially Snowflake, kind of ecosystem quickly. We talked about GraphQL. Now let's talk about bring all these components together. Today's announcement. How are you, helping the market, helping the users uh, to once again, as you talked about, solving some of the problems. The whole idea is to make things easier, lower the barrier of entry, and also let folks scale also. So talk a bit about that.
I think overall, kind of stepping back, right? What's happening in the industry is very simple, right? You've on one end, you have the amount of data that you have that is exploding, and the use case that you can, the amount of value that you can derive from that data is also increasing, right? So you have transactional, analytical, hybrid streaming data. You're using that data for more and more kind of applications, ML, AI, analytics, application use cases, of course, that we've had for the last few decades, right? So the number of use cases are increasing, the value of data is increasing, the amount of data is increasing. This is also causing an increase in the number of data sources and the types of databases that we have, right? We thought there's going to be one database that does everything. That's not happening, right? We have hundreds of different types of databases specialized for different types of workloads, for different types of use cases. That's amazing. So that's kind of happening on one side. On the other side, what's also happening is that developers are increasingly kind of desiring to build more and more applications, and they want faster velocity. So they want to build services, they want to build applications, and they want to build it as quickly as possible, right? So these kind of two things are happening. And this is required, and this is secular. This is happening across the industry. This is happening for just with increasing internet penetration and stuff like that. This is a massive secular trend that is going on. More data, more applications, and more digital products being built. In this situation for the industry, the core enabler is data access. If we can get the people who are building products and services access and ease that access and automate that access to exploding amount of data, right, that they have, we're done, right? That's kind of a big industry level problem that gets solved, and that allows innovation on both sides. It allows us to innovate with our data. It allows us to innovate with the products and services that we're building.
When we talk about explosion of data, is it happening across the board, or there are specific industries which are, because the fact is that we kind of live in a data-driven world. Everybody is collecting data, everybody is creating data, but some of the data has value, a lot of data doesn't have any value at all. So talk a bit about, are there any specific use cases, industries where it makes more sense?
I think it's exploding everywhere. It's exploding like horizontally across the board. So it's exploding for everything from tech giants to financial services to healthcare to manufacturing to logistics, of course, right? So I think it's exploding everywhere. To your point, though, there's different amounts of value attached to that data, right? But everybody is figuring out how to extract more and more value from data, right? Because the whole idea for a business, as the business is innovating and improving, is that increased amount of data can provide the business important insight and improve their ability to operate with the customer, right? Like, for example, if you think about somebody is doing car servicing, right? Like, why would what is the value of data for this industry that is such an offline industry where you take your car where it is serviced for something? But if you think about the entire supply chain, right? The idea that I'm going for a particular appointment, how old my car is, how old my components are, what are the different places I can source this from, integrate insurance into it, integrate the vendor that's providing these services into it, right? There's a lot of data that is being generated, and the right people being able to capture that improves their efficiency and ultimately improves the value prop for the final user. It improves that efficiency. That said, again, different amounts of data will have different value, right? So, but people are smart, right? People are not stupid in the sense that nobody wants to waste time and money by capturing data that is not useful. So people will always try to capture data that is adjacent, useful, derive value from it, and then move on, right? So that's happening across the board.
Talk a bit about this is like many industries, a busy, crowded space. What unique value proposition Hasura is bringing to this market also through this integration?
I think just extremely simple value prop, which is that Hasura automates API development when it comes to data APIs, right? That's pretty much it. Today, the alternative without Hasura is to build that by hand and use a framework, use a particular programming language, and build those APIs by hand. Hasura provides that level of flexibility, that level of performance, and that level of security that you would have gotten with a handwritten API, but Hasura automates that process, right? And I think that's kind of that's the most unique value that we're kind of providing to our customers and our users. People, instead of spending a year to build applications, are able to now do it in 2 weeks because of the amount of time that is reduced in setting up those APIs.
We are also going through a phase where a lot of companies are looking at cost cutting. A lot of layoffs are happening. But the fact is that even if you remember early days of COVID, companies were like, hey, you know what, we will be cost cutting, there will be a recession. But the fact was that during COVID, tech industry actually grew because we are creating technology which is running in modern world, so we cannot stop growing here. So talk a bit about what you are seeing in the space, what kind of impact you see, and once again, how are you helping companies, organizations to become more cost efficient?
Yeah, I think I mean, like you said, cost efficiency is a priority for everybody across the board. Cost of capital has increased. And so everybody is kind of, everybody's cost cutting so that it provides a level of hedging on the bets that they're making for the future, right? I think from our point of view, Hasura is, a very valuable tool in this time, especially when people don't want to really pause innovation. They know that the world is going to continue to work and as they navigate the current scenario. And so what they want to do is they want to increase efficiency, right? You want 10 developers to be able to do the work that a team of 20 or 30 would have. And tools like Hasura that increase automation, that provide more access, that increase security without human intervention, become really, really valuable. And that's kind of what we're seeing from our users and customers as well, right? Where these kinds of services that provide more automation are basically a godsend to these users, to these folks who are building applications and modernizing. Because otherwise, without Hasura, they would have deprioritized these projects and they wouldn't have had the bandwidth to work on them.
And as we do look at these customers, they are leveraging other OLAP platforms as well. So talk about, how, is it like limited to a specific, or other platform can also benefit from this?
No, I think with our GraphQL and OLAP strategy is going to be beneficial across the board. We've added support for BigQuery that we added a little bit earlier this year. We added support for recently for Snowflake. Just a few weeks ago, we added support for Athena on AWS, which is kind of a Presto-inspired engine for different sources on AWS like S3 and whatnot. So I think that's been our OLAP story so far, and over time we'll just continue to add more and more OLAP sources. So this idea of the data API and the automated data API on different types of data sources, especially OLAP sources, is going to be valuable across the board.
Now let's go back to the announcement. Talk a bit about the availability, which phase is it in beta phase, who can access it, how they can access it.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's released in early beta, but publicly, so that allows our users and customers. We've had a few design partners over the last few months and weeks as we've been building this, and now we're kind of going out from that private and closed preview into a more public preview. So you can kind of go onto Hasura, download or sign up on cloud and start playing around with Snowflake. And of course, it's an early release, so feel free to kind of keep reaching out to us and engaging with the community to understand how Hasura is kind of being used, to give us feedback, and then we expect that this will go GA in a few months.
Tanmai, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course talk about this announcement and also talk about the larger, bigger picture there. So thanks for those insights, and as usual, I would love to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Swapnil.